Awesome.
That
Great.
was legit. Oh my God, that was crazy. You put that together yourself?
No, actually, I had a friend who did it for me like yesterday. So I was like, I want to have a brand, something that would like basically tell like what I do and just like some videos and clips. And he put it together. I was like, whoa, man, like this is really
Yeah, I'm like hyped up now. I'm ready to go.
you're ready. Awesome, awesome. So, yeah, welcome everyone who's in the audience right now. We're very excited to be talking to you today. 2021 is your year, and you're gonna get a job, and that's it. Like we're claiming it today. 2021, it's your year. So if you are excited for 2021, put excited on the comments. We want to feel the love and want to see that you guys have the energy because I don't know about you, Austin, but I'm energized. I'm like hype right now. I'm like my energy level is like over 100% right now. So I'm like I'm ready.
I feel you. I feel you, especially with that video, the coffee, like the anticipation going back and forth, like leading up to this. I'm with you. I'm like 110%.
Awesome. So let's take advantage of that energy. Let's start, Austin. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? Like who is Austin? What is your company, Cultivated Culture, about? And like I always ask my guests like this question: what is your quote or philosophy that you live by, that you always stand for? So go for it, Austin.
Yeah. So, I mean, in a nutshell, basically, obviously I run this company called Cultivated Culture where we teach people how to land jobs without applying online. And I've been doing that for about 5 years now, 5 to 6 years. You kind of lose track after a while. But for 5 of those years, I also worked at Microsoft. So I was a director of partner development there. And that was an amazing time. But essentially, I went from, if we rewind back to college, I had terrible grades. I had a 2.58 GPA. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I had a biology degree, and I ended up with this job in healthcare that was just miserable. And so essentially, I did what a lot of people do, right? We go to our friends and family and career counselors and the internet, and we ask, how can I make this happen? How can I get this job? What does this process look like? And they all tell us the same thing, which is essentially, tweak your resume, tweak your cover letter, apply online, rinse and repeat. It's a numbers game. And I did all that. I applied to like 300 companies and I didn't hear anything back from any of those places. So I had to kind of take it into my own hands and find a system that worked for me. So I did a lot of testing, a lot of experimenting, faced a lot of rejection and failure, but eventually developed this system that I used to get in the door with Microsoft and Google and Twitter and a bunch of other places. And that obviously led to the job offer at Microsoft. So what I do now is basically teach people that same system. And I would say that, the philosophy that's kind of guided me for a long time is a Twain quote, which is essentially, I'm paraphrasing here, but basically, if you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. I think that's pretty accurate, whether you're looking for a job and applying online, whether you're like thinking about buying Bitcoin or jumping into Clubhouse or whatever it is. Always good to see when everybody is doing something to take a step back and be like, what's really going on here? And that tends to open up a lot of additional avenues that are less traveled.
I know that's something that you mentioned there that I found very interesting because with Clubhouse, for example, I joined it, but I didn't really know what was going on. I saw a lot of people just like the hype and everything. The similar thing, but it happened with TikTok back then when it first started like the whole hype, and I feel like sometimes we're so afraid to like jump into something new because like not everyone has done it in the past, and then you're just like, should I really go for it? Like no one has really done it in the past. I don't have that experience, that testimony. I don't know. I don't think it's suitable for me at the time. And it's totally fine if it's not in your priorities, by the way. But don't be afraid to just jump out of your comfort zone just because you haven't tried something in the past. I always say that.
Yeah.
And I know you probably have a lot of stories for clients as well who like you always tell them like jump out of your comfort zone, right? Like if you're doing something you feel stuck right now, just go out of that zone. I kind of want to know, go a little bit more in depth into your story, Austin. So you mentioned how you had a low GPA, how you landed your offer at Microsoft and everything. So can you like tell us in like 2 to 3 minutes or even less than that, like where do you grew up, and what lessons did you learn from your parents, your family, your friends, and like how did that help you shape into the person that you are today?
Yeah, I mean, so I grew up in New Jersey, and we never had to pump my own gas until I went to college. But that's a story for another time. But basically, I think the big lesson for me that I've gained looking back on all this, and something that I think a lot of us run into is this whole trajectory of figuring out what we want to do. So when you're basically able to walk and talk, you're like 3, 4, 5 years old, like the question starts coming, like, what do you want to be when you grow up? And at that time you can say like whatever you want, right? Like astronaut, I want to be in the WNBA, I want to be the next Steve Jobs, and everybody's like, yeah, like you can do it, whatever you put your mind to. And you feel good about that because again, there's no limits, right? But then you get older and the question persists, but the scope of like acceptable answers really, really narrows.
Mm.
And essentially, those same people who are narrowing the scope, they don't really give us a great set of tools to go out there and find new things, right? They don't really allow us to explore what else is out there. And so when we get to college, we're forced to pick a major, we're forced to dial into what we want, but nobody's really allowing us to explore or telling us or showing us what's out there. Like I had no idea that I could work at Microsoft without like knowing how to program or code. I thought you had to be technical to work at a place like this.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I felt like I had to just accept something that from the menu of known careers. So that's, doctor, lawyer, accountant, banker, whatever it is. And so I chose doctor, and that's like, my parents nodded with approval and smiled, and like their friends smiled, and everybody seemed like really happy, like, oh, Austin's going to be a doctor. And so like, I made that decision based on other people's approval, not necessarily because that's what I wanted to do. And I also made that decision because I felt like I was forced to make a decision. Like I didn't really feel like I had the luxury to explore. Like, I was told, we're paying for college and, it should be a major that, aligns with the career and something you could be successful in and all this. So, I went into biology. And that's a big disservice, I think, that the higher education system and the education system in general does to our students and the young people in the country. I really think there should be more options to explore. But basically, that's sort of the approach that I took when I got to college. So I settled on pre-med, and then immediately I failed chemistry my freshman year. I failed French my freshman year. Like I just tanked my GPA, and there's no way any medical school was going to take a chance on me. So I had to pivot a little bit. And to be honest, like I had a lot of support. Like my parents were supportive of me. My friends obviously were my friends. They were supportive of me in the way that, friends, with the good and the bad, the ways that friends can be supportive, but obviously there's stuff that's missing there. And so I think a lot of it really fell to some self-reflection and actually taking the time to do some of that exploration to figure some of this out. So the support was definitely there, but I think it wasn't necessarily in the right places or the places that I needed to really figure out how to be successful with, my strengths and my brain and the way that I viewed the world.
No, I agree. I think like sometimes we gotta pivot a little bit and just like go out of our ways because we're told, and that's something that I live by, right? Limited beliefs. We're told that we have to do one thing and only one thing, and then we do that, and then we just find ourselves lost. We spend 4 years of college doing something that we don't really like, and then we find ourselves working at a company doing something that we don't really like, we don't enjoy, we don't see. Like it literally, it's a chaos. Chaotic, right? And so I feel like that's something that a lot of people, and not just in college, like just in general in life, right? Like people should really be thinking about like, how do I break that limited belief of what society tells me to do, and then sort of like shift it a little bit into what exactly do I want to do. And I feel like that's important, especially like right now in this times, like with COVID-19. I realized that a lot of people found themselves doing something that they don't really enjoy, right? And I feel like that's important for everyone that's watching right now. If you have questions for me and Austin, by all means, put it in the chat. We're gonna feature some questions throughout the live and at the end as well. Whether it be about job search, career strategies, LinkedIn, whatever it is that you're interested about, go for it. We are here to help you get a job in 2021. So with that being said, Austin, let me transition a little bit from your story to sort of like the job search, right? I named this event or this live navigating your job search in 2021. So my question is, Austin, what was something that you saw, like a trend, like you saw, whether it be on your clients or everyone during COVID-19, when it comes to the job search? Like, what is something that you saw that was repetitive, whether it was in the resumes, or I know you launched something about resumes like back, I think like this week, right? So what
Yeah.
was a trend that you saw like in the job search during COVID?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the biggest mistake that is being made out there is essentially people just continuing to come back to a process that isn't working for them. And in anything else that we do in life, like if we try something and it doesn't work, we usually stop doing it. But for some reason with the job search, like we just keep coming back for more in these channels and processes that aren't getting us the results that we want. And so mainly what I'm referring to here is applying online. But I will preface that by saying, you know, you should be kind of getting out there and keeping track of your metrics and the channels that are available to you and your success rates with each. So when you submit an online app or when you get a referral or if you talk to a recruiter and they kind of get you in the door, you know, how many times is that happening? What do those success rates look like and what are the outcomes? And then you can allocate your time proportionally. But typically what we see is that applying online, one, it's super competitive. So 75% of people out there are using online apps to get in the door for jobs. So that's the vast majority of candidates, right? 75% of people is a lot of people. So it's super competitive. And then obviously there's only, you know, so many slots open for interviews and only, you know, one spot for the person getting hired. So our success rates are just super low. And so when that's the case, you know, some people can be very successful applying online and like more power to you if that's the case. That's awesome. It seems like you found a really good niche for yourself. It seems like you're messaging your value. It's all on point. So like keep doing what you're doing if it's working. But if you're applying to, you know, 5, 10, 15, 20 jobs per day or more, and you're not getting anything back and it's not predictable and you end up feeling like, you know, why isn't this working? Or you end up settling for interviews just because they're the ones that come through, or you're not getting any interviews at all. Like showing up and doing more of that isn't going to fix the problem. Like you need to take a different approach. And really at the end of the day, if we do take a different approach, you don't really have much to lose because what you're doing right now already isn't working. So you basically don't have anywhere else to go, right? So in terms of you know, risk. So then what are the available options? Well, when we look at the data, the hires are really being made through referrals because, you know, we have a lot of people coming in through the online apps, but only a small portion of them are getting in the door. So where are the hires coming from? Where is that majority coming from? It's really through referrals, networking, word of mouth. And so, you know, a lot of people ask about how that happens or what the situation is. And basically, you know, when we look at a company, there's a couple of things going on. So one, good companies, they're always expanding. They're always looking to hire. They're always looking to bring on great talent. And companies like us, they want to go for people that they know and that they like and they trust. Like if we're going to go on a date with somebody, you know, we're probably more likely to go on a date that was set up by like our best friend versus like finding some random person with like an online ad on Craigslist, right? Like that's just probably not going to happen. So it's the same thing here. Like companies don't want to date the person from Craigslist. Like they want somebody that's a known quantity. And the stakes are even a little bit higher with companies because if they make a bad hire, it's really expensive. There's a lot of data out there that shows basically bad hires can cost companies anywhere from tens of thousands to hundreds of thousands, in some case, millions of dollars, depending on the role. So if they make a bad hire and they have to start from scratch, they lose out on a ton of revenue and a ton of forward progress. So they're very wary about the type of person that they bring in. So again, referrals, that known quantity, it makes it much, much easier for them to stomach that risk because it's coming from somebody that they already know and that they trust. And so essentially the way the process works is when a company, so I guess I'll share a story. A friend of mine, his team was opening up a role. And so at a weekly team meeting, the VP announced, you know, hey, we got this headcount, we're opening up this role. If you or anybody you know wants to apply for it, like send them my way. So this was a big company, and there's a lot of red tape and bureaucracy. You know, we got to write the job description, we got to get it approved by 6 people, we need to make sure we have the budget. So the time between that announcement and when the job was posted online was about a month, maybe a little bit more. And so what's happening during that month? Well, everybody who was in that team meeting, they're going after the role, they're telling other people at the company, they're telling their friends, like all these people are getting in the door before anybody even sees this posted online. And so basically by the time this role gets posted and the online apps start coming in, all of these candidates who have that +1, that support from a known quantity, whether they're already an employee or they know an employee, like they're already in the door and they're like, quote, the candidates with, the best chance. I don't know what the quote was, but they're the candidates who have the best chance of getting in the door because of that referral. So the people coming in cold, like you're competing against these known quantities who have already been through the process. And that's really hard to overcome. So basically, that's the hidden job market in a nutshell. If people have heard that phrase, that story illustrates what happens. And so if you want to be in that hidden job market, if you want to be in those early applications and interviews, you have to build the relationships first. And I know it's uncomfortable. I know you might be thinking, well, what if I don't know anybody there? That's cool. Like we can make new friends. Like we can make new connections. Like that is possible. And if you go that route, if you invest in learning how to do that, you're going to see so much more success, both with your job search, but with the trajectory of your career in general.
No, I totally agree. And I feel like you mentioned something about, building relationships before you actually like start reaching out to people or even applying for jobs, right? And so I just want to remind the people in the audience, if you have questions for me or Austin, put it in the chat. We're going to, respond to them. We're here to help all of you. So don't just use the hashtag question and put your question on the chat right now. And if you're excited about this, just click the love button or click the live bulb button, just that your connections can also learn from Austin and myself as well. And share the live, share the love. We're here to help everyone. If you're excited, put excited on the comments as well. I always like to have people that I want to bring on these lives. But you mentioned something important about building relationships, right? So I made a post like about a week ago, I think it was, and I think like people were so surprised about it, and I was surprised that people were surprised about it. So the thing is that a lot of people think that they need to start networking when they apply for a job. So sure, I applied for a banking position or a marketing position, and then I'm gonna start reaching out to those people at those companies now. What you don't know is that you might get selected for an interview within a week, within a month, who knows when, right? And so the problem is that if you start networking once you apply for the role, then what happens if you get an interview and then you need to now look for people to kind of help you like with the mock interviews and learn about the company, and then you don't have time to, because they're not going to respond right away. Sometimes people don't even respond because they're busy, right? And so now you're sort of like in this little stuck in this space right now because one, you didn't network on time, and that's important. So you didn't build the relationships beforehand, and then now you're trying to look for people who can help you in that application process. And I feel like with that, what I made that post about was basically build the relationships before you start applying for that company. But how do you know when to build a relationship? Okay, so I'll give you a tip. What I do, I have a networking sheet, right? I have like 800 people on that spreadsheet. And basically, I also have a spreadsheet for applications. So what that means is I basically have my top 10, 20 companies. And then I have a section where I list out every time those companies recruit. Some companies recruit in the fall, some companies do in the summer, right? I have that on my spreadsheet. Why is this important? Well, if you know, now let's say your favorite company is Google and you want to apply for Google and you know that they recruit in the fall, you're not going to wait until September to start networking. You're going to use your entire summer to do those coffee chats, to start talking to people, to start building those relationships, because that referral that you were actually talking about is not going to happen like one day after you met that person. But like, for example, I'm doing this with Austin today. I'm not going to tell Austin, refer me to XYZ company tomorrow. It needs to be developed over time. And I feel like that's one thing that people are not taking advantage of. It's like doing what you need to do beforehand, right? And I also made a post about like how your sort of like research portion needs to be done beforehand, right? So like I have a Google Drive with like the companies that I want to work for, and I have basically the information that that I need for that company on that Google Drive. So if I apply for a position, I'm not going to wait until I apply or I hear from an interview to start doing the research. I'm not going to wait. And we're going to go into something that a lot of people are asking about in the chat right now. I'm not going to wait until the company actually calls me for an interview to start thinking, what are the company's current problems? What are they facing? What are their challenges or pain points, right? Because of COVID-19, a lot of companies are facing a lot of, struggles, right? And so, knowing that beforehand puts you step ahead in the job search game, right? And then from these, I want to sort of transition into the value proposition document, because let me tell you, everyone asking me about this. Everyone ask Austin about the value proposition document, because we want to be a step ahead in the job search game. And a lot of people are asking it on the chat right now. So, Austin, what is the value proposition document, and how can a job seeker that's watching this live right now take advantage of this to make sure they stand out in the job search process?
Yeah. So it's something that I call a value validation project. I call it VVP for short, just to make things easy. But essentially, this was kind of born out of something that didn't have to do with the job search. So when I was transitioning, I guess it did indirectly, but when I was transitioning industries, I needed to find a way to build experience. So I was going from healthcare to digital marketing and tech. And a lot of people would look at that and say, well, your healthcare background doesn't really count for anything here. So I had to figure out a way to build my own experience. And so I did a lot of freelancing. But as a new freelancer, I'm competing with people who had been at it for a very long time and who had case studies and testimonials and client results and all this other stuff. And so I started thinking about, what are the levers that I have to compete on? Like, how can I differentiate myself? And one was price. I could obviously come in a little bit lower than these other people. But two, I could also compete on the value up front. So I know that a lot of these freelancers, once they had the case studies and the clients, they're probably not sharing as much value up front because they want to get paid for that value. So I said, all right, well, there's an opportunity for me. If I share a little bit more up front, even if I give some stuff away, I can sort of solidify my value to this person and potentially win them over with that price. So that's essentially what I did. I would look at these people's businesses, I would audit them, and I would do a competitive analysis. I would look at their specific site and their strategy, and I would just give them, 3 specific things that they could go do to improve. And I would say, look, I can help you do the rest of this. This will get you the first 10 to 20%. I can help you do the other 80. And that ended up working really well because people would go implement the stuff that I gave them. They would see that it worked, and then they would want to work with me. So I took that and applied it in the job search because I essentially started noticing the same thing where, one, we're all relying on this same document, this resume, right, to sell ourselves. And all of us, we're all like individual, unique human beings with different backgrounds and different experiences and different strengths and, different, ways of expressing ourselves. And to take all that and shove it into an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, it just doesn't really make sense. And then on top of that, the resume is just horrible. Like it violates all the rules of good sales and good marketing, right? And at the end of the day, it is a marketing document. Like the job search process is essentially a sales process. Like you're hoping that the company will take money out of their pocket and put it into your pocket. So you're essentially providing the service or the product. So when we start thinking about it that way, if we look at marketing materials that companies use, especially companies that do a great job of it, the message is always made about their customer, their prospect, right? They don't usually talk about themselves. It's, hey, I understand your pain. Hey, here's what's in it for you. Here's what we can do to help you. And the resume doesn't really do that. It only lets you talk about your past and yourself. And that can be really tough for a couple of reasons. One, if you know that you can do this job, but you don't necessarily have the experience, you don't really get the chance to talk about that. And two, especially one thing I noticed when I was a recent grad and a student, like the playing field felt so flat. Like everybody was competing on the same stuff, GPA, major, the courses you took, where you interned. And it was like just those 4 things. And so that really frustrated me. And it also, there's just such a high volume of resumes that it's really hard to differentiate, like, who is actually the better candidate here. So I decided, instead of going back to the Twain quote that sort of drives me, I looked at everybody's doing this thing. Everybody's creating this resume. And I took a step back and I just asked myself, like, is this really the best way that I feel that I can convey my value? And the answer was no. Like, I was used to putting together these proposals for freelancers, and like I'd created some websites. And so I felt much more comfortable conveying my value in that forum versus on a resume. So I just said, instead of spending hours and hours on a resume, why don't I try to do the same thing I did in freelancing for these companies? Like, let me do a competitive analysis. Let me audit their products. Like, let me read up on their companies. Let me listen to interviews. Let me go survey their customers, and let me get that data and then bake it into essentially like a little pitch deck, like a 5 to 10 slide deck that essentially says, hey, here's a catchy title with what I'm going to share. Here's me telling you, like, I understand your company. Here's your mission statement. Here's a quote from your CEO. Here's a pain point. And then here are 3 ways you can address that pain point. And I just started leveraging that in every interview that I went on and every conversation that I had. And I can definitely talk about some specific examples if that would help people. But basically, that helped me really stand out. And it almost allowed me to leapfrog a lot of these traditional candidates because they were so focused on the resume and all these traditional marketing materials, which aren't as clear, that my value just seemed a lot more clear than these other folks, even though they had more experience. And that's feedback we tend to get a lot from people in the community. We had somebody land a head of marketing role, and basically the interviewer told him, like, hey, we had other folks who had more experience, but the deck that you put together, like, it was so clearly obvious that you were the one who best understood where we're trying to go. So, like, welcome to the team. And so, like, there's a huge opportunity here because the current process muddies the waters and makes it really hard to understand value. If you just step outside of that and create your own value and illustrate it on your terms, that gives you a huge advantage over everybody else.
No, I agree, certainly, because I was actually sharing how it's just a small story. I went to an Apple interview, and I passed the first round, went to the group interview, everyone was there, and there was a girl who came in with a gray folder, and Apple has like this gray color on their Apple symbol, and then the folder had the little Apple design as well, like she made it. And then what's funny is that she was holding that folder in entire interview, and it was a group interview, so we were like 5 people and the manager, right? And so I kind of was curious about the folder as soon as she came in. And so me as a candidate, I can only imagine what the manager was thinking, like, what is this folder that she's holding, right? And so when she was asked, like, oh, what is that folder that you have? She said, oh, I'm experienced with design, and since I know this role is a lot about customers, I made some designs that we could offer to customers whenever they come for whatever problem they have, because this was technical support. I'm sure you know about that. So she basically used her design skills to make up a sort of like designs to help customers better understand Apple products. And I was completely blown away because like I was just like, what? And like I thought that I would come in with my research and I would stand out, like the delivery portion and everything. Sure, that's part of the equation, as I always say. But like if you have something that can help you stand out, as soon as she had that folder, I stepped out of that interview and I knew she was gonna get it. It's funny because me and her spoke before the interview, and we spoke afterwards on LinkedIn, and she told me about getting the offer. After we spoke, like 2 days later, she got called for the offer, and I said, I knew it. Like who wouldn't hire her? Because come on, like she used her design skills to basically tell, like, hey, this is what I have and this is what I bring to the table. So I feel like sometimes we underestimate the value that we bring to companies, and that is why we don't spend time on doing these things. But I can tell you, companies will value you more knowing that you can solve a problem that we have, as opposed to just coming and saying, I know what the values and mission statements of the companies are, right? Like it's the same thing, like as you said, competitive analysis, like using data. Like majority of companies are driven by data. If you understand data and you know how to take that and do an analysis or an opinion based on that, that makes a difference. And that's what companies are looking for, right? So that's very important to mention. Austin, we have a question from the chat, and I want to actually like give the audience the opportunity to ask questions as well. So Kasim, thank you for your question. He said, how can I stand out while networking? Any tips on cold networking, connecting with hiring managers and recruiters? So we talked about networking a little earlier today. So I'm curious to know your thoughts on this.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just saw Jonathan pop in the comments. So what's up, Jonathan? But yeah, so essentially in terms of just providing some context, usually we've talked a lot about like identifying companies and value validation projects and networking. So just to give a quick like overview of the order in the system, basically the way that I viewed this and the way that we work through it now is like starting with your target company. So I'm going to pick like 10 to 15 places that I would absolutely love to work at. And instead of investing my energy in, 100 applications, 200 applications, I'm going to take all of that energy and I'm just going to sink it into this small group of companies that I really, really care about. And then I'm going to start by finding connections at those companies. So I'm going to make a whole list of about 10 to 15 people at each place. So, 10 companies, 10 connections, that's a minimum on each side. That's 100 people minimum. I'd actually recommend closer to 150. And so now you're set up with those two target lists, your contacts and your companies. Then I'm going to start doing research on these companies. And so just jumping to another question that Mohammed had about how do you find these pain points? I'm doing everything I'm listening to company earnings calls. I am going and finding interviews with executives and anybody who's really evangelizing the brand. I'm getting out there and I'm trying to use the product myself. Like, can I sign up for a trial? Can I get in and use the product? Can I go find data that other people have compiled on this industry? Can I look at what their competitors are doing? My favorite by and large is to go talk to their customers. Like, can I go interview people who are using the product or who are in a position to pay for the product? And can I learn from them? And so I check out all that stuff. I'd look at social media as well. I'd have these conversations with employees, but I tried to just get as much information as I possibly could on these companies. And then at that point, I would start my networking and then I would work my way into a value validation project. So the VVP tends to come a little bit later on in the process once you've already started creating connections at these companies and you have a little bit of an in. So the middle section there is this networking piece. And so the big mistake that a lot of people make, and you can't really blame them because of the way this is set up, but we use what's called a me mindset, or at least that's what I call it. And that's essentially when you show up and you say, hey, Stephanie, you work at Apple, and I want to work at Apple. So here's my resume. Like, can you refer me in? Can you give me advice? Can you look over it? So on and so forth. And that's a really bad look. To be frank, because essentially what you're saying is like, hey, Stephanie, we've never met before, but I would like you to go to your manager and tell them that I'm worth tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars and that you'll vouch for my work. And you working at this amazing place, like crushing it, doing your thing, like you're in the position of leverage here, like not the person who's reaching out. So this is almost like, if I saw like, Hugh Jackman on the street or somebody super famous and I went up to them and I was like, Hugh, you know what, man, we've never met before, but I need you to get me that audition. He'd probably just like laugh in my face because he'd be like, I have no idea who you are. Like, why would I ever do anything for you? And that's essentially how we're showing up. So what we need to do is take a step back and think about like, one, how we like to be engaged with, but also how the natural relationships in our lives have been built. And typically those relationships have been built on a series of interactions, not just one email or one phone call. And then they've also been built on mutual value exchange and common interests and shared values and similarities. So how can we leverage that in the job search? The first thing is exactly what you mentioned earlier. Like, let's start early. Let's not wait until we need that job to network. Let's start making networking a daily habit. So you mentioned having the sheet of connections. Like, I have the same thing. I have a whole Excel sheet of here are all the people that I want to stay in touch with. And it's typically around 30 to 50 people at any given time. And every day I just go through and I send something to somebody. I try to think about, how can I add value to them? What was our last conversation like? What are their goals right now? And that's a bit different for me now, given the people that I'm targeting. Whereas, if you're a job seeker, you may be wondering how to dig up some of this info. But really, everybody wants to be a part of a success story. Like, everybody wants to help in some way. And so one of the easiest ways to get in the door with people is to either make it about them or make it about them and like tie yourself in as the success story. So something that I love to do is just look through people's profiles. I think that was mentioned in the chat here earlier. Diana said, check their LinkedIn page. That's one of the first things that I do. But I also Google their name and I look through their other social profiles and I try to see if they have any portfolios or personal websites. And then I try to pick an angle that I can use to make it about them. And so instead of, something along the lines of like, hey, Stephanie, here's my resume, help me get hired. Maybe I show up and say like, Stephanie, like I was watching your live with Austin and it was incredible. Like, I'd love to know how, like, I'm super impressed by, somebody your age getting out there and like, you already have this massive audience that seems to love you. Like I'm just getting started down the path of LinkedIn. Like, would you recommend that I start doing LinkedIn lives or should I start doing text posts first? And so a couple of things here. Like one, I'm showing that I know you. Like I've done my research. I showed up on your live, and maybe even I've been engaging with your posts before this just to kind of warm things up. But then I'm making an ask that isn't super large and is very easy for you to answer, because you can tell me like, hey, start with text posts, like find your voice, yada yada, and then move to lives. But then I can go do that and I can come back and I can say, hey, I did this thing, like what's next? And we can continue that. The other thing that you can do is tap into that research that you've done, like asking really smart questions about, hey, Austin, I saw that, Microsoft is, that they are having this specific challenge. And a lot of the financial analysts think that they won't be able to overcome it because of X. How are you thinking about X? How are you guys thinking about solving for this problem? Really what it comes down to is like, can we add value to the other person? Can we show them that we're credible? Basically, can we do anything to make it about them instead of making an ask about us? And so if we approach it that way, in like the best analogy I have is like when I was a kid and I played soccer, like it was the beehive. Everybody went around and everybody's trying to score and like shoot every time. And the coach was like, guys, stop. Like you have to pass the ball 4 times before anyone's allowed to shoot, or like we're all running laps. And so that's the same thing here. Like, can you make those passes before you shoot your shot? Like, can you give value first before you make your ask? And if you do that, even if it delays things by 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is, like you're going to be so much more likely to get that connection. You're going to be so much more likely to build that relationship with somebody who's willing to go to bat for you versus just showing up and kind of like just dumping all of your hopes and dreams on them, this like person who's never met you before.
No, I agree. And I think like you mentioned something very important, how we can help people. So I feel like job seekers in general think that they don't have the advantage. They like it's only them asking for something, but they don't really know that they are actually can help people. And I'll give you an example. So you ask about connecting with hiring managers and recruiters, right? I can tell you one of the ways when I was studying, like in 2018, I believe, one of the ways that I built up those relationships with recruiters, it's that I didn't necessarily ask them to get me a job. I didn't send them my resume. I was not like, hey, Austin, here's my resume, hire me. I'm pretty sure you have gotten like messages like that, Austin, like just out of the blue, like, hey, Austin, here's my resume, hire me, right? And so it's like, if that's us that are not even recruiters, I can only imagine like actual recruiters, how many of these messages they get, right? And so think about it. You're hitting on messaging people who get tons of hundreds of messages on a daily basis of people saying the same thing, hey, hire me. Well, I said, you know what? I want to be different. So the way I was different was that I was helping those recruiters, because you never know, like these recruiters might need to fill out certain amount of positions to a certain point of time. And if you're someone who can be voice for others and have a community already, then offer that to them, right? I remember in 2018, I would be like messaging recruiters and say, hey, I saw you posted a job on your LinkedIn, and I know you're hiring for this and this and this. I'm actually super connected with 3 organizations on campus. I actually have a huge network here on LinkedIn as well. If you would like me to, you can just email me more information about the job, and I'll definitely like share with my friends and people at the university. And then like they will be so thankful to that, because they don't have the access to the community that you might have, right? You might be connected with tons of people that they don't even know, right? And then you're just helping them. You're not asking them to give you a job. You're just developing a relationship, because a relationship, it's really about like more of giving than actually receiving. I always go by that, like giving. And I remember, I think it was like last year, I helped another recruiter, and then the way it happened, it's that they started a new diversity program, and I said, oh, well, I have tons of thousands of people and students and like early career professionals here. If you want, like email me your program, and I'll make sure to like forward and share with everyone, right? And I remember after I shared with like my people, she got over 300 new applications for the program, right? And that is a huge turnout, just huge turnout. And honestly, I was not expecting anything out of that, right? But you never know, that might be the recruiter who 2 years from now, it's the one who is hiring you from a job, right? That might be the recruiter who is actually like sending you to the correct recruiter or hiring manager for the position that you apply for. So building that relationship and finding ways to like find that common ground that's not always about you asking for something, like not always be the person to ask for like the coffee chats or like like the email, like be something different. Maybe a lot of the recruiters are content creators right now, so like add value to them, comment on their posts, like send them those messages, like you're making an impact. Like they like to hear, everyone likes to hear that they're inspiring others. So if you're getting inspired by someone, literally tell them that, because that makes a huge difference. So whenever people ask me about that question, like, oh, like how do you connected with recruiters before, right? And I tell them like recruiters are my friends. I don't see them as just, I literally don't see them as just like a regular connection. I see them as my friends because I established that like friendship sort of relationship. But that was a great question. Thank you so much for asking that. And anyone else, if you have questions, put it in the comments, hashtag question. And honestly, you guys should really be giving a lot of like love to this live. So hit the love button right now, because Austin is dropping some gems here. And I think you guys are really, really going to take advantage of that. So Austin, I want to talk about a little bit of LinkedIn, because we're using LinkedIn right now. So LinkedIn is like popping right now for everyone. So I kind of want to know your perspective. You've grown your network to over 600,000 followers, which, by the way, congrats. We're having someone with such a large amount of community, I'd say, here. But I want to know, for someone who I guess is just starting off on LinkedIn and, they don't really know what to do, like who to follow, like what, like someone who's just starting off on LinkedIn in general, what are like your top three suggestions, I guess, to really kick it off and like, establish their brand in 2021?
Yeah, and I actually think that we can combine like two things here with networking and LinkedIn. So, first off, the most important thing to do is get your profile on point, because your profile is essentially your sales page, but it's also what LinkedIn is indexing. So I think a lot of people don't realize that LinkedIn is a search algorithm the same way, or search engine rather, the same way that Google is, or the same way that YouTube is, or Amazon. And so it's actually the largest search engine for recruiters, right? Like recruiters are on this platform every single day, and they are looking for candidates. And so we've all run a search on LinkedIn, right? But have you ever stopped to think about like, why did this person show up first and this person showed up second versus the other way around? Like, how does that work? And so there's a whole algorithm going on in the background where LinkedIn is essentially stack ranking people for each of these searches. And so if you actually optimize your profile, you can show up higher in these search results. You can get more visibility. You can get more clicks. And then once people are on your profile, if you've optimized the right way, you can end up winning more of these opportunities. So the first place to start from top to bottom, I always go for profile picture first. So there's a study that came out of the University of York that basically found that they were interested in how we form impressions off of images. And it turns out that we only need a 33 millisecond glance at an image to form a first impression. But more interestingly, that impression doesn't change with a longer view time. So basically that first impression is lasting, as we've all heard. And most candidates just kind of upload a profile picture that's, from their phone or whatever it is. So instead, what I recommend doing is going to a tool called photofeeler.com and upload like 4 different pictures and see which one gets the best results. Because essentially what happens is PhotoFeeler is a community of people who will essentially vote on the qualities of your picture. So you can say like, hey, this is for business, and they will rate you on traits like influence and likability and competence and other stuff. And there's a space for them to share specific feedback, like, hey, your background's too blurry, or I don't like your outfit, or I do like your outfit. And then you can kind of go off of that to create a really, really strong profile picture. Second, I would always recommend having some sort of cover photo. Like that's the biggest piece of visual real estate. We process visuals 60,000 times faster than text. We've all heard a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? So you might as well add a free 1,000 words to your profile with this image. And it should be something that tells a little bit more about you and your story, and shares a little bit more about like your brand or the message you want to convey. And that could be you speaking, that could be you volunteering, doing a hobby with family and friends, like whatever it is that you feel is meaningful to you, like put it up there. Then you have your headline, and we could spend a lot of time talking about all this stuff, but essentially the biggest thing to know for your headline, for your about section, your experience section, you want to work in these relevant keywords. So essentially what I do is I'll open up a document like Google Doc, Word Doc, whatever. I'll go on LinkedIn and I'll search for a job as if I was going to apply for it. And then I'm going to scroll through all the listings. And for every job that I find that I like, I'm going to copy the job description. I'm going to paste it into this doc. And I'm going to do that until I have like 20 to 30 job descriptions in there. And then I'm going to go to a site called ResyMatch, R-E-S-Y match.io. They have 3 scan options. If you choose the middle one, the job description scanner, you can paste all of that info in there and hit scan. Basically, ResyMatch is going to tell you all the keywords that appear most frequently across all those job descriptions. Those are the ones you want to focus on because those are what's going to help you boost your rankings for that those LinkedIn search results. So especially not just for any search result, but for the search results that are relevant to the roles that you're looking for. So then I would work to include those in my headline, in my about section, in the bullets in my experience and my roles. And then finally, I would also work to include them in my skills and endorsement section. So something most people don't realize is that the skills section is essentially like the tiebreaker, or the long tail in terms of this ranking algorithm. So basically, all else being equal, if I have 5 endorsements for public speaking, somebody else has 10 and you have 15, all else being equal, if somebody's searching for public speakers, you're going to show up at the top because you have the most endorsements for that skill. I'm going to show up at the bottom of that list because I have the fewest endorsements. So we need to make sure that we have the right skills in our skills section. We also need to make sure that they're being endorsed. So something that I like to do is if I am part of a class or if I am in a community or if I have a group of friends, like I'll just create a Google sheet and say like, here's a link to everybody's profile. Here are the top 3 skills, like add your profile, add your top 3 skills. Let's all go endorse each other. And basically you create this like endorsement exchange that lifts everybody up because you're all going to get rankings boost for the skills that you want. So that's where I'd recommend starting is with the profile. But then going to the networking piece, like there's 2 things here that are so critical. One is that when other people are putting stuff out there, like if people in your target industry or at your target company or these recruiters, as you were mentioning, if they're putting something out there, a post, whatever it is, like they're putting it out there with the hope that it's being seen and that it's adding value. And so if you show up for those people and you respond to that and say, hey, this was valuable, you leave a thoughtful comment, you support them, you add additional value. Maybe you tag people like, hey, check out this post, like here are a couple of my friends. You're basically plus oneing what they're putting out there, and that makes them feel good. But on top of that, I would also think about the content that you could create that could benefit other people. So one of the easiest ways to network with folks is to start building something of your own and include them in it. So I was coaching somebody several years ago who decided that they wanted to start a podcast, and they were literally just going to interview people who had the target job title that they wanted. And so they called it, essentially the podcast was all about like that one specific job title in one specific industry. And this person just emailed everybody and said, hey, I have a podcast and it's, the goal is to feature impressive people who are, impressive project managers, or I forget what the specific job title was. And this person just brought on guest after guest after guest. And like nobody really listened to the podcast. At least I don't think, it didn't turn out to be this major hit. But it was such an easy way to get in the door with these people, because instead of just saying, hey, can I have an hour of your time? There was a benefit for the other person because there was a podcast involved, right? And this person could tell their story. But then the person hosting the podcast, my former client, literally got an hour to sit down and talk to this person and ask them questions. What's the biggest challenge you're facing in your role? Same thing that you and I were talking about earlier, but it's disguised as a podcast, right? So this person's guard is a little bit down. They're more willing to share. And then this person felt like they had to reciprocate because, my former client was like nice enough to have them on their podcast. So that's one example of what building something can do. So how can you do this? Like, can you start a podcast? Can you start doing a roundup article? Maybe you go find 25 recruiters and you say like, hey, what's the biggest mistake job seekers are doing right now? And then you compile it into a long form LinkedIn article. Can you go, talk to 3 people and say, hey, I'm creating a LinkedIn post and the idea is to share advice from project managers again, and like, I really admire what you do. Would you be up to be included? And so by using LinkedIn's platform and the content creation aspect, you can add value, or you can add perceived value to these people without potentially, really having anything behind it. And I don't mean that in a disingenuous way, but people like to be a part of something. People like to be, as you mentioned, Stephanie, they like to feel valued. They like to feel heard. They like to be recognized. And so if you do that, and you can do that through content, one, you're going to build your own brand, but two, you're also going to build some champions in these people because you recognize them. You called them out. You said like, hey, you're impressive. You're valuable. Let me feature you. So I think you can kind of kill two birds with one stone on LinkedIn, which is why I think it's such an amazing time to be on this platform. And if you haven't gotten started, now is the time to get started for sure, because we're sort of at this tipping point where the organic reach is still really, really high, but LinkedIn is still very established. Unlike TikTok, Clubhouse, they have a lot of reach, not as established. We don't know what's going to happen. And then you have Facebook and Instagram. They're established, not very much reach. So we're right at the sweet spot here.
No, I love that. I love that how you mentioned that, because I feel like when people jump in on LinkedIn, they feel like it's this huge, just professional network where like the only thing you can do, it's really just like watch what other people are saying, people with more experience, imposter syndrome and all these things. And I feel like people should, the message that, you said, and I want people to really take from here is that, you have something to add value to. Everyone has a unique story. Everyone has a unique thought. That's why, everyone comes from everywhere and we all do not think the same. And that's the beauty of it, right? So you might think you don't have something to add, but you do. And that is why, like me, for example, I create posts every day just because I like it, right? I don't feel obligated to. I want to share something. I want to share what I did before that, was successful for me. And I'm just hoping that someone might relate to it, right? I'm not really like trying to like put the perfect post out there, right? And I'm pretty sure you had that before. It's just about like you really putting what you want out there and like creating that brand for yourself. And I think that is really, really the key here. I want to ask you a question before I go to the chat. We have like 7 more minutes, but I want to ask you, Austin, from your client's experience, I know you talk about one of your clients, but what is your favorite client story, and like what did your client do to get that job? So, if you can think of any client, I'm sure you had a lot of them, but if there's one that you always talk about, what did that client did different to get that job?
Yeah. So so real quick, just jumping back to what you said, like I'm such a believer that like what you put out there is what you attract, right? And so if you're like because I talked about the podcast earlier, right? If you're creating a podcast and you like don't really care about the people that you're talking to or the subject matter, you're like, I'm just doing this to get a job, like that's going to show through. But if you're creating the podcast because you like genuinely want to learn everything you can about, let's say again, project management roles, like that's going to be where the value is. And if you're posting stuff that is genuine to like what you want and what you're interested in, like that's going to shine through. And even if it doesn't reach 1 million people, it only needs to reach a small group of people who really buy into what you're talking about. And so it's super important to be authentic and to share like what's true to you when you do the stuff that we're talking about, because that's how you end up building that tribe that is really in line with you and your values. And those are going to be the most valuable people. Like I'd rather have 10 crazy loyal followers than 1 million followers that I like bought from some robot who don't give a crap about me, right? So that's what it's all about.
Let me give a shoot out on that, and sorry to stop you, Austin.
No, you're good.
I'd rather have a tribe, a community of people, than like a large amount of people are not gonna put anyone. So if you ever feel like that, just create your small community. Other peoples will join you on the way. I'm sure that's what happened with Austin, right? He started with his own community, his own tribe, and then other people joined because they wanted to. So if you're watching this right now, if you're starting small, it is okay. Like we all start at a certain point. Like a year ago, I did not think that I was gonna crush 20K like how I am right now, right? And it's just like we all started somewhere. And so like don't feel as if you have to follow everyone else like journey or like pace. I think Austin was talking about that today in the morning too. You see, I follow Austin's post so much that I know exactly what he talked about. So he talked about that, like don't follow people's pace, like do it on your own pace, because that is important. But go ahead, Austin.
Yeah, so the number one story, I always come back to the same person. So her name's Miriam Jamil, and she is like the coolest person. So when we got connected, she was a high school Spanish teacher, and she wanted to make the transition to marketing. Like she had done teaching things, she loved it, but she was ready to make a move. And when we talk about changing industries, we talk a lot about transferable skills. But a jump from teaching high school Spanish to being like a digital marketer is a pretty big leap to make. And so naturally, she was struggling with getting people to recognize her value. So we did essentially the things that we talked about today. First, we had her come up with a list of 10 to 15 companies, and she got really specific about like which companies she wanted to target. We had a whole bunch of criteria for, what her values were, what she cared about, in what order, and we made sure we aligned those or layered them onto the companies as we did our research. We came up with our 10 to 15 companies. We found our 150 contacts, and we just started reaching out. But we were doing it in the exact way that we talked about. So somebody here, I can't see their name, it just says LinkedIn user, which happens sometimes with the platform, but they basically had a great reply. So they said one technique they use to build the network is to find somebody who has a similar role to the one you want, look at the previous companies they've worked for, and leverage that as a way in the door. So that's exactly what I did in my search, and that's what Miriam did too. She basically found people in digital marketing who came from a non-traditional background, because that's exactly what she was doing. And she honed in on that similarity. She would email them and say like, hey, I saw that you work in digital marketing now, but you made the jump from this non-traditional background. Like, that's super impressive. I'd love to learn a little bit more about that. And so that was her entry point. She made it about them. And then she started to have these conversations. She would dig a little deeper. And so she built the relationships up. And then at the same time, she was doing these value validation projects on the side. So I think she actually created 3 total for her job search. And long story short, with each one, she got a lot, like with every conversation, she got better. With every value validation project, she got better. And eventually, she ended up landing a job as a role as an SEO manager. So she manages the search engine optimization for the agency that handles LinkedIn. So she basically is in charge of LinkedIn's SEO. Like, she's one of the people working on that, which is pretty cool. And that's a pretty significant role to land, coming from being a high school Spanish teacher. But it doesn't stop there. So she actually went back to the companies that she either didn't get hired at, or the process took too long, or whatever, after she accepted this role. And she basically said like, hey, I've accepted this role, managing LinkedIn's SEO. I know that I sent you this proposal before. If you're still interested, we can work together on a consultant basis. And so she ended up starting a side hustle right on top of that. So she literally went from high school Spanish teacher to managing LinkedIn's SEO and having her own SEO side hustle, simply because of this exact approach, building the relationships and then finding a creative way to add her value. So this stuff works, no matter what your background looks like. It actually tends to be most effective in that case when you feel like your value isn't getting recognized on a resume or through the traditional processes. So I absolutely love her story. And now she posts a lot about what she's learned on LinkedIn. You can definitely, I would look her up. It's Mariam, and then Jamil is her last name. But yeah, she kills it. And she is she took the process to heart and absolutely crushed it.
Yeah, I actually gave her a shout out. So shout out to Miriam. I actually mentioned her on the comments, so hopefully she sees this live.
Nice.
So I always see her commenting on your posts. So
Yeah.
love her story for sure. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. And I think the last question we have for you, Austin, because I'm sure we want to wrap it up quickly, but how can I excel in an interview? So I think I get this question like all the time. What is like one tip that you give people when when they're interviewing for like any company, any role at all?
Yeah, so we could do like a whole afternoon on how to excel at interviews, but really, in a nutshell, it comes down to 2 things. The main thing it comes down to is aligning your value to the company's needs. So essentially, showing the company that you understand why they're hiring for this role, what the expectations are, what the value is that they're looking for, and then how you'll execute on it. And the second piece of that, which is really the supporting factor, is research. So 80% of interview success happens before you walk into the room on interview day. And this is all of that research that we talked about. So I mentioned a bunch of ways to research companies before, listen to their earnings calls, check their social media, survey their customers, try to use the product yourself, read articles about them, like get in as deep as you possibly can. And then think about like, why are they hiring for this role? And not just like, oh, they need a project manager. I keep going back to that example, but why specifically? Like, what project is there to be managed, and why did they choose that product, and why are they willing to pay somebody, tens if not hundreds of thousands of dollars to manage that project? What are the expected outcomes? Like, what does success look like for this role? You need to ask yourself all those questions. And then you need to start formulating answers. And the answers need to be less focused on just you and your background and more focused on, here's why your background is supporting evidence for what they're trying to do. And so instead, if they say, like basically my litmus test for this is, if I have an interview answer and I can remove this company's name and I can put in one of their competitors and it still works, the answer still makes sense, that's not specific enough. It's not a good enough answer. So I need to be able to have an answer that is specifically tailored to this company, that shows them I know where they're at, where they're going, what challenges they're facing, what they expect from me, and why I'm the person to deliver that. And what I would do is I would sit down, I would have a Google Doc of the 10, most frequently asked interview questions. And then I would write out answers to those 10 questions. And then literally every day I would come back and I would revise them, I would rehearse them, and then I would work to memorize them. And once I had them memorized, I would do exactly what we're doing here. I would fire up my webcam, I would put my mic in place, and I would record myself delivering the answers. A huge part of communication is nonverbal. I think something only like 7 to 10% of our communication are the actual words that come out of our mouth. The rest are like how I'm using my hands and my facial expression and my body language. And so that's what a lot of us don't pay attention to. So I would record myself like sitting here and I would be delivering these answers, and I would try to like match up my hand motions to like what I'm talking about. And then I would see, like, I would watch back and I would say, is this what I want? Is this, is this answer on point? Am I rambling? Am I saying or like, or do I have another crutch? Are my hand motions, gesticulations, body language in line with the vibe I want to put out there? And basically at that point, when I walked into the actual interview, I knew all of my answers cold. I knew my story cold, and I could spend more time building a relationship with the person because I wasn't worried about what I was going to say. I wasn't worried about what examples to give. I had that all on lock. So if you do that, there's a lot that goes into that. I just packed it into a nutshell, but that'd be my recommendation.
No, and I love that because I feel like a lot of people forget about those like small things when they're walking into interviews. And then on top of that, it's also like how you close the interview. I said this story before. An interview is like a roller coaster, right? You are the one who sort of managed the energy of the conversation. And so if you start with like a lot of energy and like energized and like, you're excited to work for the company, and then at the end of the interview, you either don't have questions for them, or, your questions are not meaningful, or you just end the note with like a low, really low energy, low note, then like you like literally did all this effort for nothing, because you're literally just like setting yourself for failure, right? So make sure if you're the one managing that conversation and the energy, right, try to have that conversation on a high level note the whole entire time, and that's how you get an offer. Thank you so much, Austin, for joining us today. We had a lot of people, like about 600 people watching us. So that was like really, really cool. Thank you so much for everyone who is on the audience. Thank you so much for joining us. If you enjoy this, literally put thank you to Justin. Just mention him on the comments. Thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm sure Justin will come back to this live if he sees like any questions he wants to just comment on. But thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. And I hope to see you on the next one in 2 weeks, which is actually with Jonathan. So that's going to be really cool. We're going to talk a little bit more about the whole networking and LinkedIn and building your brand and getting a job offer in 2021. So thank you so much, Austin. Thank you, everyone. I hope everyone have a great afternoon. Take care.
Thanks, Stephanie. See you later.